morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Curry de Castillo, and this is another Unison Creative Writing webinar. And joining us today are Mary, Christina, and David Phillips is here. And we're talking about a subject near and dear to my heart, trains, special to me, like many of us. My family got here by way of train. First of all, ship by way from Austria to Halifax, Pier 21, and then taking the train across the country. As my parents said, they couldn't believe how this country went on and on and on. And David Phillips is here to tell us his story that took him from Glasgow, outside of
I,
Glasgow, and ultimately to Calgary, and his experience with doing daredevil work without really much safety equipment, to talking about safety codes, the issue of obsolescence, and of course the immigrant's story. So, David, the floor is yours. Please take it away.
thank you. There were about 10 of us in the drafting office, each with a large drafting table. Each table was equipped with a brush for sweeping off the soot particles that settled through the air on your drawing. There was a technique to this. With a special flip of the brush, you would not get black streaks on your drawing. I hated the atmosphere in that office because, in addition to the soot particles, the room was a fog of tobacco smoke. Just about everyone smoked all the time. We were in St Enoch's Station in Glasgow, one of those grand arched Victorian stations on a monumental scale. At that time, it was the headquarters of British Railways Scottish region, and it was the last days of steam locomotives. This was my first job since graduation. I had to start with 6 months in the drafting office, learning to draw with ink on linen and all the protocols of the railway, which had been set up through hundreds of years of tradition. The slope of the lettering had to be exactly right. The size of the fonts that were used for specific circumstances. I have to say that those drawings, when finished, were works of art, and I gradually gained the techniques, which I kept for many years. On this particular morning, I was probably the youngest one in the drafting office. Some of them had spent their entire professional lives in that location, in all that smoke. But I only had to do 6 months as an engineer in training before moving on to the permanent way department. On that morning, the supervisor came in and asked for volunteers to assist in a bridge test out in the countryside. My hand shot up but when I looked around, nobody else had volunteered. There were smirks on some of the faces, and that started to get me a little uneasy, but I paid little attention to that. It didn't particularly register with me at the time, for I was just so anxious to get out of that foul atmosphere into the countryside. The bridge was near Dunfermline and consisted of 6 bowstring trusses on quite elaborate cast iron pillars. A typical Victorian age bridge. Now, for those of you who don't know, the bowstring truss has a top girder that is sloped like a bow. The bottom girder is straight, which carries the deck across which the train runs. The pillars are quite high. To my horror, I was given a big wooden box with a leather strap containing a strain gauge. This was a Victorian age strain gauge, consisting of a brass tube which had sharp pointed feet at either end and could be clamped to the girder. When the girder flexed, the distance between those clamps either increased or decreased according to the load. A light projected down that tube onto a graduated screen. By reading the light beam's movement on the graduations, you could tell how much the girder was flexing. It was a very elegant instrument. I was then told to climb up on the upper girder until I got to the mid-span of that truss, then clamp the instrument onto the girder. A test locomotive then would go back and forth across the bridge, and I was to measure the deflections of the girder. The only problem was that there was absolutely no safety gear, not even a hard hat in those days. Now I knew why there were no other volunteers, and I remembered those smirks. Well, I did it and tried not to show my terror. After that, there was an inspection of the underside of the bridge deck from a very flimsy scaffold, but that was a piece of cake after the bowstring girder. When I went back into the drafting office next day, I pretended that it was no big deal, which impressed the others. I think that I had earned my spurs that day. When I moved on to the permanent way department, I had another experience that stuck with me, not of the same type, though. I had to spend a few days with a gang of men called a permanent way gang, who maintained the track in those days. Each 5 miles of track was maintained by a permanent way gang. This gang were based in a bothy along the side of the track and spent their whole working lives in the same gang. The bothy was the center of a gang's working world, and they made it cozy. There'd be a pot-bellied stove, and in the one I was attached to, there were humorous picture postcards that marked the passage of the years as men had come and gone. I particularly remember one going back nearly 50 years with a caricature of the Kaiser. They knew their section of track like the back of their hand. They had to walk it every day looking for loose bolts, subsidence, possible landslips, blocked culverts, and anything that was related to the safety of the track. When they found something, they fixed it. What impressed me with this gang so much was that they were uneducated rural men whom I'm sure had very little schooling, and yet they had a feeling for that track that no learning could bring them. I could walk the track and see nothing, whereas they would pick up a dozen things. When they fixed those things, I realized that I knew even less, even how to dig a hole properly. There's a technique to everything, and these men made me feel foolish for my ignorance. I felt humiliated, but did not show it. It is a lesson I've never forgotten. Sadly, that life is now gone, for a Matisse maintenance train with all its sensors can maintain 30 kilometers of track in a day. After serving my time in the permanent way department, I moved to the bridge branch. Every department seemed to have its rite of passage. Looking back, I think that the new arrival got the rotten job, and they would see if you passed or not. My first job in this department was a tunnel inspection, somewhere on the main line between Aberdeen and Edinburgh, which was the through route to London. It was an old tunnel as most of them in England are, built of brick. The purpose of the inspection was to see if there were any weak spots where the mortar had come out of the brickwork. The problem was that it had 100 years of soot on it from steam trains, so it was not a simple visual inspection. The soot had to be scraped off first. Thank God that was not my job to scrape the soot off. We had a work train that had platforms mounted on it so that people could work off the platforms to inspect the roof of the tunnel. The work had to be done at night because that was the only time a track possession would be allowed. Even then, the work train had to be pulled out in the early hours of the morning to let the fish train from Aberdeen through to London. As you can imagine, it was a filthy job. The men would scrape the soot off so that I could observe the bricks, and then I would have to record the state of the bricks at all the inspection points. I think it took us about a week of being totally covered in soot each night. I think that job was probably the worst I've done in my life, except for one when I first left school, when I was a brickish labourer for a gang who were relining the inside of an electric furnace with refractory bricks and chipping out the old ones first. The subsequent jobs were interesting and easy because I had no fear of hanging off flimsy structures under bridge decks over rushing rivers. When I emigrated for me to take a job at the bridge branch in the Department of Highways in Regina, I thought that I would be finished with trains, but that was not to be the case. We emigrated by ship from Glasgow to Montreal, and from Montreal we started a big train journey like no train journey that I'd ever experienced before. The Canadian Dome Car train ran across Canada in those days, from Halifax to Vancouver, and my new employer had booked us a private cabin from Montreal to Regina. There's a lot to be said for slow travel of yesterday by ship and train. It's time for a psychological adjustment to your surroundings. And an adjustment it was. We thought that the ship journey was so long, and we had the sense of traveling so far that we couldn't see how we could ever return. We did not realize that when we got to Montreal, we were only halfway. The journey with its lesson of how big Canada was has stuck with me all my life. We were fascinated with it all. In those days, there were request stops. And I remember after traveling through apparently endless uninhabited boreal forest, the train would stop, and there by the track would pick up a couple of people who looked like lumberjacks or hunters to us. It was all both romantic and scary. Nowadays, plane journeys somehow diminish the grandeur of Canada. That was almost my last meaningful encounter with trains. But not quite. 7 years later, found me in Vancouver working for a consulting company that had received a contract for the replacement of the Second Narrows Railway lift bridge, which went from Burnaby to the North Shore, adjacent to today's Ironworkers Bridge. It was a pretty major project, and no bridge of that scale existed in Canada. I designed the substructure, and because the company had no experience in this type of structure, they outsourced the design of the superstructure to a consulting company in New York. I was assigned to spend a year in New York overseeing the design on behalf of the owner in the consultant's office. It was a huge professional opportunity for me because these were the leading designers of large railway bridges in the world. However, it was not going to be such an exciting prospect for my family, who would probably have to live the year in upstate New York while I commuted to New York City, which was a very violent place in those days. My wife gamely bit the bullet and agreed to go, but was not enthusiastic, to say the least. Fate intervened in the form of an offer to come to Calgary. Professionally a backwater, but a much better life from family. I chose the family over career, and that was the end of any association with riding in trains or designing for trains. I have never regretted it. There, did it grab you?
Lovely. What a wonderful story. Really allowed the listener to feel and smell the soot and your fear and the journey. I yeah, there's so many great vivid images there, David.
So, give me a criticism of it, you guys. Tell me where I went wrong.
No, that's not the point. The point is to look at how you did it.
Okay.
And I wanted to draw people's attention to the beginning, how David got us into this story. This is a particular type of memoir writing where he picks a theme and traces it through his life. And that's partly how he writes, because he's, or at least in this part, because he likes history and he likes to see the flow of events and development and changes over time and how they affect his life. But the way he gets into it is gripping. And that's his style. He always has a way of getting into a story. And we wonder what it's all about. He's got 10 people sitting in an office, and we're wondering, what is going on here anyway? Which makes us want to read some more. So he describes the scene. Then he puts himself into it and describes it in more detail in the second paragraph.
Would you mind reading the first couple sentences again so we can remember what they are?
Okay, it starts with there were about 10 of us in that drafting office, each with a large drafting table. So we don't know where it is, what the drafting is all about. And then he describes it in a bit more detail, the atmosphere of that room. And each had what was on each table and what they were drawing, what were they doing, and how meticulous it was, and then the atmosphere in the room from the smoke, people smoking, basically. And of course, the soot. He doesn't tell us at this point where the soot comes from. And then he goes into the background, where they exactly were and what they were doing. So now we've got some understanding of the whole situation and of how he fits into it. Then he goes on to describe the first event of the story, and how he got out to this bridge and his adventure with this bridge. I'll stop there. I've got more to say, but I'll leave it there at the moment.
Well, what have you got to say, Christine?
Well, I want to appreciate Mary's expertise as a writer. I don't have such fine-tuned things to say. In fact, what's sitting with me mostly is I'm still dangling under the bridge. I'm wondering where when the train was going back and forth.
I was up on the top, underneath. Well, underneath was no problem. It was more when I was sat on the top of that arch that you saw in the photograph, and hanging on for dear life, trying to read these numbers and write it in a book at the same time.
Shall we go back to the first?
Well, there's some supplemental photographs. The first photograph. Oh, yeah.
So you're hanging from the top of that arch?
Well, to the first, I go onto the top. I climb up the slope until I'm in the center. And there's where I clamped the strain gauge on, and then that locomotive,
Right.
oh, it's not in that picture, goes back and forth, and I read it as the locomotive, but he's puffing all this
And you're up on
smoke,
the top.
and I'm on the top, and there's no safety gear. You can see
Oh
it
my
from
gosh.
here. In those days, they threw on a few boards and said, walk out there. There was no safety gear whatsoever. And no one seemed to care about it. It was amazing, actually.
Yeah,
One false step.
I wanted to say a bit more about this whole, your description of this experience. It is. And my query was, okay, your fear, the horror of the situation comes through. There's a lot of technical discussion there about the equipment you had and what you had to do. And the question I have is, or maybe the comment I have is, when David was writing this, he had to make a decision of how much technical information his reader could handle and whether it was necessary to include.
Yes, and I certainly did go over that because very often you can get yourself sucked down a path because you know all this detail. You can't sort out what's irrelevant for the reader.
Yes.
That's difficult.
It's an issue of writing that you have to think about as you write.
Well, that's when you have to decide who your audience is, right? Like, who was your intended audience? Was it other trained engineer type folks who would like relish that and love those details? So did you pick an audience going into this?
I thought largely of my social circle, and my social circle is not particularly engineering at all. So I knew I had to explain some technical stuff, and I knew they were smart enough to understand it, but I had to hold back from going too far. Yeah. So, yeah, I was trying to hit a middle ground. We talk about this problem in writing of getting into too much detail or not enough detail, just trying to find that happy medium. But we run into that conversation all the time. How many times have you sat and listened to someone go on about something and you think, for God's sake, I don't need to know all that stuff?
The same with writing.
Yeah.
And as a reader of this piece, my response is, I just kind of skip over that. I don't try to really understand the technical, because for me, that doesn't really matter. It's the experience that matters that he's relating. And if he wants to put that in for the people that will understand, fine. I don't have to fuss about that.
Just because you didn't find there was too much, it just went on, and then it was gone.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. It was okay. I don't know what you thought, but
I really enjoyed the technical detail. Not that I'm an engineer, but I was really imagining these instruments. And for me, this piece is so expensive, both in terms of time. You mentioned that one of the instruments you were using was designed in the Victorian age.
Oh yeah.
And then you bring us all to the present, where trains are no more. People travel by airplanes. So there's something about the historical breadth of your life, or the length of your life, has spanned so much change.
Enormous. Yes.
Yeah. What I would have wanted to know more about this was, how heavy were these things? How did you carry them up there? Rather than what their function was. Well, how did it affect you, in other words?
You have to understand that these were precision instruments.
Yes.
When you think about the Victorian age, the instrument makers got to a level of perfection that even today I think we struggle for. Nautical instruments, sextants, clocks, and they rose to a ultimate level of precision and then became obsolete. And that happens with so many things in life. We perfect them and perfect them. You can see it with the internal combustion engine. Then it'll be obsolete. We'll be in electric cars and all that's gone. So it's the same thing.
That's another aspect of that you didn't really discuss in this piece, which was, were you awed by this Victorian achievement? Or was it just you were just worried about how to get your job done?
I always had a great admiration for the precision of some of these Victorian instrument makers. But I was awed by the weight of this damn thing. It was a wooden box. Because they're precision instruments, they're in an elaborate wooden box with settings and felt on the inside. And so the box is as heavy as the instrument. And so it's awkward. The thing was about 2 feet long, and the box was about 2 feet long and about a foot high and a foot wide. That's quite a bulk. It had a shoulder strap, so you just put it, or a heavy leather strap that you just put around your shoulder and started climbing up the bridge. And then when you're up there, of course, you have to get it out.
And you can't bump it on anything.
No, you got to be careful to clamp it on. And what do you do with the damn box? Once you got the instrument out, I can't remember that. But I know I was hanging on for dear life. I had the instrument there. I was trying to write down in a notebook the readings. It was all so primitive by today's standards.
I think those things, which you haven't mentioned which you're telling us now, would have added a lot here, rather than how these instruments function, how it affected you, how did you act with all this stuff, and how. So we can imagine you there more than the instruments.
Okay. Then the thing lasted all day, because then you went down underneath the deck, and that's the picture you're seeing now with me on the left-hand side. And it was just a bunch of planks hung under the bridge by a work crew. They put them up before we arrived, and you somehow scrambled down onto them. Now looking at, I can't see where I got down there off the bridge deck, but I did somehow.
With no safety line or anything.
No,
that was it.
That was it. But labor was cheap. That was the tradition, was that workers were expendable.
Well, and I'm imagining that safety wasn't even thought of. You didn't.
No.
Were you actually thinking, "Oh, geez, where's the safety line"?
No, I was just thinking, what's going to happen to my wife and kids if I fall? That was what I was.
Yeah. And there was no union. Was there a union?
Oh, no.
What year was that?
That was 1956. That was my first job.
Those unions were quite powerful in Britain then. But there was no railway workers union.
There was a railway workers union, I think, but I was an engineer, so I was exempt from the union. But you would have thought the union would have gone for other stuff. Anyway, there was I went back, last year. I went back to Glasgow. I would have liked to have seen that bridge. It's the Alloa Bridge, just down the road from Dunfermline, between Stirling and Dunfermline. But I couldn't get out there. But I did get to St. Enoch Station. Now, you have a slide, I think, of Saninix Station today. What happened was 10 years after I left Britain, they stopped using Saninix Station, and the big hotel that was in the front of it was demolished, and the big arch building was turned into a shopping center. Sorry, I'm.
Okay, okay.
So there's some slide. Carolyn has some slides. If you.
What is this one, David?
Yeah,
That's it.
that's the next
That's the
step.
bossy.
That's the next step.
Oh, that's the bothy where the gang lived in that all their working career. They lived, well, they worked out of a bothy like that. And you see, it's got a little chimney for bad weather with a pot-bellied stove in there. And these guys spent their whole working life based out of a bothy like that. Bothy's a bit of a Scottish word, I think.
What's the name with a B? Bothy? What's
This was in the photograph, I think, is later, but when I was there in 1956. The steam trains were still there, but they were rapidly starting to be replaced. Within 5 years, there was probably not another steam train in the system.
I like this little section. It's all one paragraph where he talks about his experience with these workers. And it's the relationship with the practical workers who learned on the job and learned all their lives, and contrasted to his experience of basically academic learning, theoretical learning, and now he's learning in a different way. I love this section.
Well, people have said to me, so what's so technical about digging a hole? But there is a way of doing it. The first soil that you dig out, you put a long way from the edge of the hole, because as you get deeper, the piles get higher. You don't want them falling back in the hole. So you have to judge how far away from the hole you start your pile of dirt. And then you try to go down the sides vertically so that you don't dig out any more than you need.
Okay, now the question I have is, would it have added to this if you'd explained it here, or was it too difficult to explain? It's just the fact that there's a way of doing it that you didn't know, but these guys didn't know is enough for your story.
Well, this is an interesting point about writing.
Yeah.
You've got your audience in mind, but how much detail do you put in? I wouldn't have thought that the details of digging a hole were that interesting. But you see, you say, I'd love to learn more about it.
Well, you start explaining it now when we're talking. But
I asked a question in our group.
Yeah.
So I was curious about.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So I think what it is you've got your audience in mind, and they're kind of like generic. But within the audience, there are people who want the details and others who don't want so much detail. So as you said, you need to find that middle place.
Yeah.
I would, if you hadn't been there to answer my question, it wouldn't have kept me up at night. That's why I asked.
I really enjoyed your description of traveling via train and not realizing how big the country was. And I like that line about I didn't know we would ever return. And I think that captures the vastness of it. And how you said how plane ride. And I like there's several times where you touch on obsolescence and the theme of things becoming obsolete. And one of the things you said, how plane journey diminishes Canada's vastness, because I think that takes us to a place of slow travel again as well.
That's one of the values of memoir writing when you're older. You see that change of things over time that younger people don't see. And it's interesting when you're older to reflect on those things, and memoir writing makes you do that. But it's also interesting for a younger audience to realize, oh wow, it was really different.
I like slow travel because it's just getting into a metal tube, seeing nothing, and then getting out 4 hours or 8 hours later on the other side of the world. You have no concept of what the world's about. In fact, you have a false concept of what the world is about.
I traveled by boat across the Atlantic more than once before it became common to fly. And every night we would change our clock by 1 hour. Instead of this, suddenly you land somewhere and you're 8 hours ahead.
Yeah.
And yes, it allows you to be human, not to sort of force yourself into another mode. And that, I think David's brought that out very nicely here. The differences, the changes, and valuing something that used to be, rather than always thinking, oh, it's always going to get better, it's going to get better, we progress, we improve, and there's nothing valuable back there to learn or to even understand.
That brings up a point. I don't want to get too philosophical here.
Oh, but you always are philosophical, so there's nothing wrong with it.
I don't think fast travel is progress. I think I hear people these days, oh, we've got 2 weeks off, we'll go to Bangkok for 2 weeks or something like this. They see nothing going there or back, just a lot of stress in the plane. They probably are in a tourist corridor, led from a hotel to a beach and back again. Yes, they see a few sights, but they could probably get better views on the television if they stayed at home. But it's a very diminished experience that everyone is chasing these days. If you took longer to get there, yes, you would have to take more time off from work. You would have to, but you would meet the people along the way. You would interact with people. Now it seems, in the words of Winston Churchill, never have so many people traveled so far and seen so little. That was his words. And I think there's a lot of truth to them the more I reflect on it.
Oh, I would agree. I would certainly agree to that. I mean, I lived in Southern Africa for 50 years, and then I hear somebody's going on a 10-day excursion to South Africa, and they're also going to Victoria Falls, which isn't South Africa. A lot of people think it is, because they fly everywhere. Boop, 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 gone back home. Oh, got pictures of elephants. Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, it's very expensive entertainment, expensive on their pocket, but also expensive on the Earth's resources. And I read an interesting article that analyzed what are vacations for? And what that person said, that for them, a vacation is for you to go with your family to a context that is different from the everyday normal, so that you can experience yourselves differently. But you don't have to go to Bangkok to do that. You could go to Canmore.
Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully more people are discovering that.
Yeah. I wonder, we're getting away a little bit from the writing here now, but I wonder, are there any comments from the participants?
I don't see any comments from participants right now, calling for any if there are. Um, what I would have been more a little bit interested is your and you dropped a few in there, but more of your thoughts on the train journey and maybe more images. And I know that's probably a whole nother story, but I would love to have heard more about what you saw looking out, what your wife thought, or those kind of things, and some glimpses. What do you remember about going uh, through those endless stretches of Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Northern Ontario?
I remember Northern Ontario's seemed to be just endless boreal forests.
Mm,
And it, by endless, you went to bed at night, you woke up in the morning, it was still the same, and all day the next day, it's still the same.
Especially when you come from Europe.
Oh,
Where
mhm,
hours
mhm. You'd think you're on another planet.
yeah, and you got the feeling of going into such a foreign world that I never anticipated that. It's like an endless world. And I can remember thinking, first of all, as an engineer, how did they manage to build this railway
Mhm,
through all this hard rock and
mhm.
swamps and things? It was an enormous achievement, and we don't really hear enough about that. We always hear going through the Rockies because it's spectacular, but that endless Northern Ontario uh, shield country is extremely difficult. Um, and
and valleys, canyons, river crossings,
yeah,
numerous rivers flowing down there into Lake Superior.
yeah. Mind you, from the train, we didn't experience the mosquitoes, so we didn't know anything about those.
Mhm.
Um, then we came out onto the prairie and reached Winnipeg, and then the prairie seemed to go on forever. I think we were 3.5 days on that train, something like that. At least. And
from Montreal.
Yeah, and so then the prairies suddenly it was another world again. From this boreal forest, we broke out onto these wheat fields, endless wheat fields, and we just got the feeling we were going to the end of the world.
That's the line. Yeah, those kind of things, right? Like the emotion, what you felt, I would like to hear in there. Like the anticipation, the unknown, the what have I got myself into kind of thoughts.
This is 56, you said.
Yeah.
Because I traveled with my family by road in 55 from Ontario. You couldn't go by road around Lake Superior then. You had to go through the US. So this dependence on train before the roads were built in Canada, already by the late 50s, you're still depending on trains.
Yeah.
Just to get there.
That's, I guess, why they had.
You maybe not have been aware of that.
No, well, I wasn't. But what struck me was that there could be request stops. Someone stood by the track waving it down, or that blew my mind. And
Sorry, what was happening? Was someone waving?
well, the train you could have a request stop. So if you were in the bush and you came to the railway track, you could wave the train down and it would stop for you to get on.
And
What?
it wouldn't necessarily be the station. This is just
No, this is just
pop out of the bush.
out of the bush.
Wow.
And I guess it was so remote with no roads that was the only form of transport to get in and out. So
the train was was the spine of Canada
Well, if
for
I
100
remember,
years.
I was
Well,
gonna say
nearly
this,
100 years.
this was built back in the 1880s.
80s, 80s.
I thought,
85 was the last fight.
okay,
1885.
I'm having a vague memory that may be incorrect. I thought that there was something about, the West would join Confederation if there was a
BC would.
BC would, if there was a train built to
Yes,
them.
but
So even though it wasn't built yet, they believed that the promise would.
yes, and my great uncle was a member of Parliament
Ah,
in 1873. And I found a newspaper report of a speech he made in Parliament in 1873 opposing the railway. That we can't afford it. We can build it to Winnipeg, and that then as the people come, then it will be profitable to build the railway. So it was a big debate.
Huh? It makes me think of people opposing the LRT.
Yeah.
That's far enough. That's good. Don't need to go further.
History repeats. It doesn't. It goes.
One other thing about our train journey was that we started off in Montreal, and there was this late spring snowstorm, and that was a bit surprising to us because it was relatively late in the year. And then when we got to Regina, there was a dust storm, and everyone was talking about, "Oh, we're back to the dirty 30s." We didn't know what the dirty 30s was, but um, uh, the other thing I remember very much too is that we had one child. It was my wife and myself and one child, and I think one person had been responsible for booking our journey to Regina, and then it fell to the local people. So we got to Regina in this dust storm. There was no one to meet us, no arrangements or anything. So I can remember us going and seeing if we could get in the YMCA. And they said, "Oh, you've got a child, you can't come in the YMCA." So we had to walk around and try and find a hotel that wasn't too expensive because we didn't have much money. But that was a real come down after this luxurious train trip. Suddenly we were looking for room in the YMCA.
You know what? This discussion makes me think of something about memoir writing as a group. We usually in our group, we get a topic and then we write. And then we come back and discuss people's writing. Another way it would be interesting would be discuss the topic first together. It gives you ideas and it brings up your opinion.
This is where the good stuff comes up,
Yeah, and then
right?
about your own experience. I think that would be interesting to try.
that would be.
I think that would be an excellent idea because this is where I'm like, oh, that should have been in there, or that should have been in there, and right?
Exactly.
So,
Until this moment, I didn't know that Mary's grandfather was an MP in 1887 or something, opposing the railway.
yeah. What was I'm curious about that, what the opposition would have been. Just a cost issue or, yeah.
Why build a railway thousands of miles across what they thought was an empty space because of and then of course the proponents said, "Oh no, we'll bring the settlers, we'll make it pay," and that's why they gave the CPR the land rights so that they could bring the settlers. And it did pay in the end, but it wasn't all that easy, I don't think.
Yeah.
They just about went bankrupt a few times, didn't they?
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lesson. I did not know that there was opposition to, but throughout progress, there's been opposition to so many things that are great. I can just think when I was a reporter, thinking back to the opposition to the Peace Bridge, that was a big issue that people didn't want to see money built on our Peace Bridge in Calgary, and now it's the place where everyone takes their pictures and it's in the postcards and whatnot, or, you know.
I, I can remember that being, um, it had just been completed. And there were still all these people saying, far too much money, we could have put it into the homeless instead.
Mhm.
And so there were reporters roving around, I hope you were them, looking for people to complain. They were trying
Uh,
to feed the fire by interviewing people to thinking everyone was going to come out to be against it. And
mhm.
someone interviewed me just up
Oh,
down by the riverbank. And I said, I thought it was a great thing. If everyone had followed that rule, we wouldn't have any of the great cathedrals in the world.
mhm.
And so it proves,
Yeah.
the great icons are necessary to us for our identity.
To our, the story we've built up. I mean, the railway was the creation of Canada, really, as it is now. And so we think it was a good thing and natural. And we've always struggled with the geography. To provide a Canadian economy with that kind of geography made much more sense to be part of a north-south economic interaction rather than east-west. But that's our identity. That's our national story that we built because it's us. We say it's good.
Well,
Uh,
it's been a lovely discussion about this, and it definitely it touches on so many points, whether it was obsolescence, whether it was about national unity, about infrastructure, so many intriguing elements, and I love how you mentioned, Mary, that it's a great idea to perhaps before you write your memoir is to have a group discussion like this, or after or during, right? Because I suspect it's a living document that we can always add to our memoirs.
this, if I was to go back and do this again now, I'm sure it would be twice as long.
Well,
Exactly. Well,
but much longer memoirs.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
what comes in the selection process, which you've done. You've left those things out because either you didn't recall them or you felt they weren't the essential things to write.
Yeah. And sometimes it's nice to get that outside point of view from someone that doesn't know a thing about the railroad or doesn't know a thing about engineering, because they might have some fresh questions and go, well, what about this? And what was that like? And so, yeah, there's my 2 cents. Well, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you again